Hello, YouTube. This is Peter with you once again. And guess what I'm going to talk about? The attempted insurrection and storming by a Trumpist mob of the U.S. Capitol building. And ironically enough, when I found out about this, I was in the midst of editing a video in which I was going to attempt to talk about politics in a calm, rational manner, as if we're all adults who could do such things. And let me just play you a snippet of that so you can get a sense of the tone that I had. In this video, I want to talk about politics and video game design. Although this is more a matter of making analogies between the two, this is not going to be a video about the politics of video games or of the video game industry. Now, as you can see, the events that I became aware of through a text message and then going online and watching through streams what was going on made me look completely foolish to believe that anything resembling an adult conversation about politics could be had in this moment in the United States of America. Before I talk about details of the event, I want to jump forward slightly and talk about what I've seen the Trumpist Republican reaction to much of this been. It basically comes down to three things. One, make equivalence between this and the actions of Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and any other leftist protests they can name and point a finger at. Two, claim that these are all not in fact Trumpists, but actually secret members of Antifa, basically claiming it was a false flag. And three, to say, yes, this is just like these other protests and violence and things, but when I believe it's justified, then it's acceptable. Those are basically the three arguments. So we've had 4+ years of Trumpists and Republicans pretending that they've held some sort of moral high ground against left-wing protest movements. Now, of course, I, for one, never believed any of that. Not only that, but we saw throughout 2020 a bunch of right-wing Trumpists stage what essentially amounted to armed insurrections in state houses. They had months and months to dress rehearse exactly this kind of action. Now, they weren't viewed as armed insurrections at the time, essentially because they were treated as if they weren't taken entirely seriously. They were not forced out of state houses with tear gas. The National Guard wasn't called on them. They were tolerated. And that showed them how the police and how the authorities would handle them in a situation like what happened yesterday. They had many dress rehearsals for this moment. But this idea now that these are equivalent to things like Black Lives Matter protests, again, they've abandoned any pretense whatsoever that they held any kind of moral high ground. We wouldn't riot. We wouldn't throw a tantrum over losing. We wouldn't loot or break things. Except, yes, you would. Not only that, but you would threaten violence. You would threaten democracy itself when it suits you. Now, as for the people who claim these are actually Antifa members, you might want to fact check these ridiculous so-called facts going around, these images of, look at this protester, they're actually a member of Antifa. So the horns guy, yes, he was at an Antifa protest. But you know what? If you look at the uncropped version of that picture, you'll see that his sign says, Q sent me. He is a Trump-supporting QAnon nutjob. The person who put that image up to convince you that this is actually a member of Antifa cropped out what his sign said to deliberately mislead you. If you believe that, you have been fooled. And there's another picture of someone, and they show him in the Capitol, and they show him another picture where you see below the picture that it's from phillyantifa.org. Well, guess what? If you find that picture and go to the actual page it's from, you see that it is an expose about how that person is a neo-Nazi. Either the person who made that image did not do their research properly, Or, once again, they are intentionally trying to deceive you and mislead you to have you believe that these are members of Antifa. They are not. Look for yourself. As for the people claiming that these actions were justified because the election is being stolen, might I suggest getting a grip? Seriously, getting a grip. I know that you have followed Trump this entire time and you have drunk his Kool-Aid, but I want you to subject the claims of voter fraud and massive voter fraud and everything you believe proves that the election was stolen, subject them to the same sort of scrutiny that you would if these were being said by Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or any other Democrat. If the shoe was on the other foot, if the claims were coming from the other party, you would, at the bare minimum, scrutinize them a hell of a lot closer than you are. Instead, you are yet again taking the words of a complete pathological liar at face value. That is embarrassing. You are believing a man who lies constantly, who cannot accept defeat because he is a sore loser, who has been sowing the seeds of doubt before he was even elected. For 5 years, he said, if I lose, then it's rigged. If he wins, then it's legitimate. If he loses, it must be rigged. When they have gone to court over these things, they do not have a shred of evidence. They simply make assertions. They pull things out of their ass. And if you were not so blinded by the cult of Trump, this would be as obvious as the sun. The emperor wears no clothes. So many people in this country claim to be skeptics of the media. It's fake news. But what that really comes down to is that the media is telling them a narrative they don't want to believe. Instead, they're going with the narrative they do want to believe. It's not as if they have carefully sought out the truth for themselves to discern what is real and what is not. It's just choosing the narrative they like most. Pick your own adventure book. That's all it is. As I was just discussing with these alleged Antifa members, no. Even the person who was at a Black Lives Matter rally was a counter-protester who is clearly a pro-Trump QAnon believer. If you had bothered to look up where this image come from and seen that it had been cropped in a way that was deliberately deceptive, you'd go, hey, wait, somebody's trying to pull one over on me. If you had gone to the source of the image of the PhillyAntifa.org and seen that this was actually, these images were from a profile of a known neo-Nazi, you'd be like, hey, wait a minute, this Facebook meme is trying to deceive me. But nope, you want to believe the narrative that this is an Antifa member and that this was all instigated by Antifa because you've spent 4 years committing yourself to the belief that you are better than this. Your side is better than this. Trumpists wouldn't do this. Republicans wouldn't do this. We're peaceful and law-abiding. Except when we're not. Except when we show up en masse for armed insurrection. So when that narrative, that high ground you imagine you held, shattered, and you couldn't face that fact, you clung to the narrative that kept you from having to confront the actual truth. These were Trump supporters. This was done in the name of Trump. You are not better than left-wing protesters. You do not stand on some moral high ground. You are not Obi-Wan Kenobi. As for the events themselves, again, I'm not even remotely shocked by this, because they've been dress rehearsing this for months. When this happened at state houses, it was in my mind that this could easily happen at a bigger level come Trump losing and having to leave office. And it has. And you know what? This might not even be the worst of it. The only thing sort of shocking about this is how completely unprepared and inept the authorities proved to be in this situation. As many people have already said, if this was a Black Lives Matter protest, it would have been stamped out much faster, they would have been much more prepared, the tactics they used would have been heavy-handed. Instead, you have guards taking selfies with people, rioters who have broken into the Capitol building, threatening an insurrection, and they're taking selfies with them. Right. But again, when they did this at state houses because they couldn't go and get a haircut, they were treated with kid gloves. They knew that the authorities wouldn't like the optics of using heavy-handed police tactics against white people who most of the time are telling everyone loudly how much they back the blue and support the troops. So they just stood back and let them have their fun. And of course, the right, for all their talk of the moral high ground, never saw showing up locked and loaded and demanding the government do what they want. They never saw that as an armed insurrection or something as much of a threat to democracy and civil society as, say, looting a Target or burning down a police station. They never saw it that way. We would never do that. We just showed up peacefully with loaded weapons and demanded the government do what we want. We're better than you. Right. And you know what? I'm sitting here speaking as if I'm talking to some hypothetical Trump supporter watching this video, and I've honestly spent the last 5 years wondering why I should even bother doing such a thing. There's an optimistic part of me that would like to believe that we could somehow talk things out, bridge our differences, but then there's another part of me that realizes that I've spent much of my adult life attempting to reason with people exactly like this. You can go back and see videos I made, in 2006, 2007, about conspiracy theorists. Now the Republican Party and the Trumpists have become the home of wacky conspiracy theorists. I spent much of my 20s arguing against people like creationists who have views that the world is only 6,000 years old and completely out there views about things like religion. And guess what? There's a strong overlap between Trumpists and them too. The far-right theocratic evangelicals have all rallied behind Trump for their own cynical reasons, and the most delusional among them believe that he's like King David, even though he's flawed, he's God's chosen one. Some people genuinely believe that. The exact sort of delusional people that I've attempted to reason with and argue against for much of my adult life have seemingly all rallied around Trump. And having had over a decade of experience prior to Trump dealing with people like that, I really had to check myself and say, is it worth it? Can you actually possibly reach them? I know some people would say, and have said in similar situations, that there's always the people in the middle that you're attempting to reason with. But the lines have never been starker. The lies have never been more obvious. The delusion has never been more apparent. Who are these people in the middle? I'm not sure who they are anymore. But if yesterday showed me anything, it's that any notion that once Joe Biden won the election and once he's sworn into office, that this would be over and we could move past it is naive. That we are going to continue to have to deal with the fallout from the cult of Trump for years to come. And they could make some sort of resurgency in the not-too-distant future. And it could be worse then. It could easily be worse then. But if you are a Trump supporter, and yesterday happened to be a wake-up call for the reality of what the cult of Trump is, then I would say to you that it is by no means too late for us to come together and have a serious conversation, an adult conversation about the problems facing our country and how to fix them. Because only we, the citizens of our country, can do that. It's a dangerous path to travel to make politics about one person. If you had reasons for supporting Trump, then try focusing on those reasons, what you think the problems are, how you think they need to be solved, instead of investing all of your hopes and energies into Trump, a man who is clearly, if you don't see who he is by now, one day you're going to have the epiphany. Wait, the emperor wears no clothes. Or you're going to spend the rest of your life with this victim complex narrative about how your messianic hero was robbed of his just victory by the evil whatever. You're going to go down a rabbit trail that's going to leave you disillusioned and completely politically marginalized. It's a sad road to travel, but it's not too late to turn around and go down a different path. So that's it. I'm done my angry rant for right now. I'm sure I'll have more to say about this in the near future. Have a good whatever time it is.